Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we're very thankful that you take the time from your busy day to join us. Last show, I hope you got to see last week, but we were trying to answer a viewer's question. His name is Steve, and he asked, Tom, that you have mentioned on numerous occasions that we no longer own our property and that the property is of public record, but he wanted to know exactly the when, the wheres, and the hows that we went from a sovereign entity to a position of inferior position with regards to ownership of land. So last week we had a broad foundation of the statement from the king with regards to how he delegated all these rights that were previous to the king's, not to the government of the United States, but to the sovereign people of the United States. And then we got into the fact that the definition in law, excuse me, of the United States, the term United States literally has three definitions. And we did this out of Black's Law Dictionary. And what it was this, to wrap it all up, to give you a quick review in case you missed last week's show, was that the United States with its three definitions meant the following. One, the corporation, excuse me, the United States. Two, the territory, the land thereof. And three, it meant the union of the states. If you remember, we got into how, if you look at the original Constitution, that the U on the United States was small. And the reason why, because if it was capitalized, it would have meant a noun, a person, place, or thing, basic English grammar. But it was small because it was an adjective, as in united, describing that the states were united in their actions and in their proclamations. So it's important that you understand this. So when the government sends you a document, or an agency of the government, or a perceived agency of the government, sends you a document and it's in uppercase black ink, they are speaking to what is called in law a nom de guerre. If you remember, we got into Black's Law Dictionary, we looked up the definition of corporation, and we looked up the definition of person and how they crossed over each other. So a person is an artificial corporate entity, and it can also be a man or woman in the natural sense. So again, you have to get into the language, because it's all based on deception, of exactly who and what you are representing when you sign your name in such a manner, or when you go into a courtroom and acknowledge, yes, my name is Thomas D'Ambra. Well, the judge is speaking to you as this corporate entity, not as the common natural person, Tom D'Ambra, the flesh and blood, Tom D'Ambra. So we traveled down that road. We get into the money system, which we have quite thoroughly on this program. And as we all know, we do not have money. We have legal tender. We do not have dollars. We have Federal Reserve notes. What is a note? An acknowledgement of debt. And what is a dollar through the coinage acts? A dollar is 25.8 grams of gold and a 15-to-1 ratio of silver. Obviously, we got into the National Banking Holiday Act, beautiful name for being robbed. But what they did was they took all the gold and silver from the people under the threat and duress of law. They liened the public trust, and then they went forward, and the so-called debt was not paid yet, and so we got into what was a birth certificate was, and how through the birth certificate, the nom de guerre that the corporate entity, the artificial person, was formed. So if you take out your driver's license, we used this as an example last week, and you look at your driver's license, you'll see that the name is in all uppercase black ink, and you go to the styles, manuals, and so forth, and you'll see that you are communicating with a corporate entity. Excuse me, folks, I have a little bit of a head cold going on, so I hope you can bear with me. So let's go back to all this information that we got into last week. Took us to the bankruptcy, because we're trying to answer Steve's question about how did we lose control of our own property, or what we perceive to own. Okay, so we got into the bankruptcy of the corporation, and that took us to Senate Report 93-549. Now, we had read a lot of this in the earlier show, and for sake of time, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but I think it's important that we cover some of this material. So again, if you wish to look this up, this is Senate Report 93-549, excuse me, War and Emergency Powers Act through Executive Orders, 93rd Congress, First Session, 1973. Now this is part of the foreword to this report. Excuse me. A majority of the people of the United States have lived all their lives under emergency rule. For 40 years now, again, this is 1973, folks, so that would bring it back to what, 1933. Freedoms and governmental procedures guaranteed by the Constitution have in varying degrees been abridged by laws brought into force by states of national emergency. The problem of how a constitutional democracy reacts to great crisis, however, far antedates the Great Depression. As a philosophical issue, its origins reach back to the Greek city-states in the Roman Republic, and in the United States, actions taken by the government in times of great crises have, from at least the Civil War, in important ways shaped the present phenomenon of a permanent state of national emergency. The foreword continues. Since March 9th, 1933, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. In fact, there are now in effect 4 presidential proclaimed states of national emergency. In addition to the national emergency declared by President Roosevelt in 1933, there are also the national emergency proclaimed by President Truman on December 16, 1950, during the Korean conflict, and the states of national emergency declared by President Nixon on March 23, 1970, and August 15, 1971. Excuse me. These proclamations give force to 470 provisions of federal law. We got into this, folks. There are approximately now 1,200 of these provisions that are brought in through executive orders. These hundreds of statutes delegate to the President extraordinary powers ordinarily exercised by the Congress, which affect the lives of American citizens in a host of all-encompassing manners. This vast range of powers taken together confer enough authority to rule the country without reference to normal constitutional procedures. This is where we are today, folks, okay? Very important that you understand this. And again, this is from the Congressional Record. You can look all this up yourself. Senate Document Report 93-549. Under the powers delegated by these statutes, the President may seize any and all property, organize and control the means of production, seize commodities, assign military forces abroad and domestically, institute martial law, seize and control all transportation and communication, regulate the operation of any and all private enterprise, restrict travel, and in a plethora of particular ways, control the lives of all the American citizens. This is not me saying this. This is a report to the Congress of the United States. Now, we've got to back up a little bit with regards to, and I know we went, if those of you who saw the show last week, I'm going to be very brief here. I don't want to be redundant, but it's a must to review. President Lincoln knew he had no authority to issue any executive orders. You see, folks, because again, remember we got into executive orders in another show? And we went over the language and the abilities and the limitations on executive orders. And what we discovered was that executive orders were not to be used to create policies against and or on the American people. They were to be used by the president in times of declared emergency to delegate quickly to federal employees only. Now, when you also get into the fact that the federal government was not supposed to be involved within the union, within the states, you understand basically that there was 2 encroachments here. One, the limited boundaries of the government, and 2, the usurpation of power by executive declaration on the people. So it's important that you understand this. Okay, so President Lincoln knew he had no authority to issue any executive order, and thus commissioned General Orders numbered 100. This is on April 24th of 1863. as a special field code to govern his actions under martial law, and which justified the seizure of power, which extended the laws of the District of Columbia, and which fictionally implemented the provisions of Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 17 through 18 of the Constitution beyond the boundaries of Washington, D.C. and into the several states. Again, in other words, what's going on here is, people may think this sounds really, I guess it just sounds completely abstract, but before this taking place, folks, the average American didn't really care who the President of the United States was. Why? Because the federal government was limited in the Union to three powers, to three divisions of powers: judicial, defense, and treasury. It had no power to regulate the daily lives, the commerce, the education, the housing of the people within the Union, within the 50 states. But it did have this power to regulate what I just spoke of with regards to districts, enclaves, and territories. The District of Columbia, or as we all know, the District of Criminals, the territories like, say, the American Samoa and so forth. So this was a major leap, if you would, of encroachment into the daily lives of the people that made up the Union, the states of the Union, which before this part, the federal government had no authority, well, still didn't. This was all done through executive privilege, if you would, okay? So it's important that you understand that. So General Orders Number 100, also called the Lieber Instructions or the Lieber Code. This is a gentleman named Francis Lieber. And by the way, folks, surprise, surprise here, Francis Lieber was an entity for the banking interest of the Bank of England, which no surprise there. Extended the laws of war and international law onto the American soil. Again, the encroachment onto the states. And the United States government became the presumed conqueror of the people and the land. This is the congressional record, folks, okay? Martial rule was kept secret and has never ended. Think of that. We're talking 1863. Martial rule was kept secret and has never ended. The nation has been ruled under military law by the Commander-in-Chief of the military, the President, under his assumed executive powers and according to his executive orders. Constitutional law under the original Constitution is enforced only as a matter of keeping the public peace under the provisions of General Orders Number 100 under martial rule. Under martial law, title is a mere fiction, since all property belongs to the military except for that property which the Commander-in-Chief may, in his benevolence, exempt from taxation and seizure, and upon which he allows the enemy to reside. There's some words here, some language that should really be jumping out at you. Number one, the biggest one here is enemy. Okay? Who is the enemy in this document? Okay, so with this language, there are some words that should be jumping out at you, and the first one should be the word enemy, okay? Because we're going to see through this document that the people of the United States, through the Trading with the Amendment, through the Trading with the Enemies Act of 1933, from the original Trading with the Enemies Act of 1917, were declared the enemy of the United States. Uppercase, United States, the corporation. So this is in plain language, okay? And the Commander-in-Chief, through his benevolence, can exempt from taxation, property exempt from taxation and seizure, and upon which he allows the enemy to reside. This should come startling to you. If anyone has never read this before, again, it's Senate document 93-549. Please take the time to go on the internet and look that up. Okay, let's continue here. So President Lincoln was assassinated before he can complete the plans for reestablishing constitutional government and so forth and end the martial law. We got into that in the last show about how, we'll never know what Lincoln's real intentions were But we got into how the 14th Amendment made us all federal citizens. So with this, so we became property of this corporation through the Reconstructionist Acts. Folks, you got to ask yourself, what did they reconstruct? They reconstructed our form of government, and that's exactly what took place. Now, let's continue. New laws for the District of Columbia were established and passed by Congress in 1871, supplanting those established in 1801 and May 3rd of 1802. The District of Columbia was reincorporated in 1872, and all the states in the Union were reformed as franchisees of the federal corporation so that a new Union of the United States could be created. Okay? Very, very important. Now we're getting into, Steve, we're going to get to your question. Now we're getting into the transfer not only of power, but the transfer of property. Who's superior and who's inferior in position here? Prior to this declaration by President Lincoln, the people were in the superior position. The states were in a superior position to the federal government. Obviously, that changes now. Now, it's the people at the very bottom, the state as a franchisee to the new incorporation, the federal government. And let me just read that again so this really sinks into you, all right? The District of Columbia was reincorporated in 1872, and all states in the Union were reformed as franchisees of the federal corporation so that a new Union of the United States, uppercase, could be created. Folks, look at the language we're looking at here. Besides everything being reformed and the positions being topsy-turvy, turned around, look at the language. Franchisee. What is a franchisee? A franchisee is subservient to the parent corporation. Again, we're talking commercial language. We're not talking common law. We're talking commercial language here. Very important. So the states, the Union, were formed as franchisees of the federal corporation. Okay? So now the federal government becomes in superior position, and the states are in an inferior position, and the people are now property of the state franchisees. Very interesting. So that a new Union of the United States, again, uppercase, could be created. You have to understand this. It's very important, if we're going to get to Steve's question, that you understand this transfer of authority and power at this point. Okay? So let's continue, please. The states became federal franchisees is related to the date when such states enacted the Field Code in law. The Field Code was a codification. Do you remember we got into the word code? I think it was show number 2 or 3, if not number 1. What's the word code mean? It comes from the Latin word coda, to be altered secretly. Do you remember that? The Field Code was a codification. Now, what's a codification? It was altered secretly. Of the common law that was adopted first by New York and then by California in 1872, and shortly afterwards, the Lieber Code was used to bring the United States into the 1874 Brussels Conference and into the Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907. So now we've gone into an international. The Hague, folks, is a system, a body of laws on an international basis. So not only have we gone inferior to the state, franchisee, the parent federal corporation, but now we're inferior to a set of laws set up in Brussels and the Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907. Amazing when you really, of course, they're not going to teach us in the public school system, but this is all very, very interesting and very important to understanding how we lost possession of being sovereign entities. So let's continue. Excuse me. In 1917, the Trading with the Enemy Act, Public Law 65-91, 65th Congress, Session 1, Chapters 105, 106, on October 6, 1917, was passed, and which defined, regulated, and punished the trade with enemies, who were then required by that act to be licensed by the government to do business. Okay. The 1917 Trading with the Enemies Act, and we're going to get into it in legalese, but I want to give you a layman's breakdown, if you would. In 1933, when the bankruptcy took place, was altered. And how it was altered, folks, was that the definition of enemy itself was altered. Okay? You're going to find it very interesting who the definition of enemy was changed upon. So, let's go forward. The National Banking System Act, Public Law 73-1, 73rd Congress, Session 1, Chapter 1, March 9th, 1933. It's funny how this March 9th, 1933, you keep hearing this. Well, the reason, folks, is because that's the date of the bankruptcy, of the insolvency of the corporation you call the United States, who you are obviously in an inferior position to. Executive Order Proclamation 2038 of March of 1933, Executive Proclamation 2039, March 9th, 1933, and Executive Orders 6073, 6102, 6111, and 6260 prove that in 1933, the United States government, uppercase, formed under the executive privilege of the original martial rule, went bankrupt. So this corporation that was formed by Lincoln on April 24th, 1863, that has gained and usurped all this power, is now bankrupt and or an insolvent corporation on March 9th, 1933, to the private bank that you know as the Federal Reserve Banking System. Folks, it took them a very short time from when they took over the issuance and control of our money system, which was December 23rd, 1913, to March 9th, 1933, to bankrupt the most prosperous corporation in the history of the world. Think of that, okay? So not only did we lose, we were brought to an inferior position, but now we are switched in a law system which is commercial, which we're going to get into right now. We became property of that corporation through the 14th Amendment and through the General Orders number 100, also known as the Lieber Codes. But now that corporation has gone insolvent, okay? So you got to stay with it. I know this is, it's pretty heavy, and there's a lot to absorb, and I know I'm doing this verbatim with these executive orders and all these decrees and all these acts and Trading with the Enemy Act and so forth, because I want you to research this yourself. Because in the time that we have this hour show, we obviously do not have the time to give due diligence to this item. But by me stating this public laws and everything, you know, you can go on the internet, you can go to the Congressional Library, you can go to the Congressional Records, and you can research this yourself. And we ask you to do that because it's very important. As I always say, education's our best ammo. And we've got to understand if we're going to turn this around and get back to the foundation of what our country was based on, we have to understand how we got to the point where we are now so we can create remedy for ourselves and for our nation. And this is what we're trying to decipher here. So let's continue with this, okay? So March 9th, 1933, Executive Proclamation 2039, Executive Orders 6073, 6102, 6111, and 6260 prove that in 1933, the United States government, formed under the executive privilege of the original martial rule, went bankrupt, okay? So you're with me at this point. A new state of national emergency was declared, under which the United States citizens were named as the enemies to the government and the banking system as per the provisions of the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1933. Now, the first time this became court record was a case called Erie Railroad Company versus Tompkins. Okay? And the note here, the legal note says, congressional record, the legal system provided this for this in the Constitution was formally changed in 1938 through the Supreme Court decision in the case of Erie Railroad Company versus Tompkins, 304 U.S. 64, limited edition, 1188. So, let's look at what took place here. What does this decision say? Now, this is from the Supreme Court itself, because, once they make a decision, they have to give a deliberation as to, okay, why? What are you trying to say through this decision? So let's look at what they actually say. April 25th, 1938, the Supreme Court overturned the standing precedents prior of the previous 150 years concerning common law, in the federal government. Now, this is the deliberation of Erie Railroad Company versus Tompkins, 304 U.S., like I said. This is April 25th, 1938. And I quote verbatim, here we go. There is no federal common law, and Congress has no power to declare substantive rules of common law applicable in a state, whether they be local or general in their nature, be they commercial law or part of a law of torts. Now, if you want to get through the legalese, what they're telling you here is that we no longer, at this point, because of the bankruptcy, are under a common law system. We are under, and I quote, commercial law or a part of law of torts. Very important that you understand that. So, we lost position with regards to sovereignty. We had no more sovereignty. The corporation that we are property and subject to has gone bankrupt to a foreign bank through deception and manipulation of the money system that they took control over on December 23rd, 1913. And not only is the money system, the corporation gone insolvent, not only have we lost a standing of sovereignty and power, we are now inferior to this corporation, but now we are property of an insolvent corporation, and the laws from which we are guaranteed by the Constitution are no longer existing through executive proclamation from April 24th, 1863, up until 1933, when that corporation went insolvent. So this is how we went from a common law system where everybody is equal under the law. Folks, the law couldn't get involved with you unless you did harm to somebody or someone's property. Imagine that. How many statues, how many thousands and thousands of statues from unelected representation or lack of representation through these appointed agencies create these statues that regulate your lives every day, thousands of them. Is that a representative government? No. Not at all. Not at all. And it's not the checks and balances of the system that we had from a superior position are gone. Because, I'll be honest with you folks, the Congress of the United States is a dog and pony show. And I mean that. Look, they passed the Homeland Security Act and the Patriot Acts without even reading them. Without even reading them. Many a congressman, were very upset about that. Of course, these bills were drafted in 1998, long before September 11, 2001. But they were never given on the congressional floor for our elected representatives to read, but they were coerced through the threat of duress to appoint them. And why is that? Because the Hegelian dialectic was in full form here. We had 9/11. They got the emotional response that they wanted from the people. The people became fearful, and the Congress passed it because politically it would have been supposedly the wrong thing to do to not pass this bill because it was supposedly given provisions to protect the American people, when all along, when you read the language of these bills, the American people, who are the declared enemies of the United States government and banking interest of the United States through Senate Document 93-549. The whole thing was geared to the enemies of the government. Folks, who were the enemies of the government? You and I, especially people like myself who are doing the diligence and the labor and the work to determine where we've gone wrong and how we've gone wrong and how we can turn this around. So you got to understand this is not a facade. This is not some conspiracy wacko theory. This is documentation in law substantiated by the United States Supreme Court. And you can research this all yourself, and we ask you to do that. So let's continue on to Steve's question. How is it that we lost control, the possession of our property? Of course, it's not our property, is it? How is it that they took control of this property? How is it that if we want to build a house, we want to put up a fence, we make any improvements on this property, we have to go get permission from the true owners to do this and then be penalized for doing it? Yes, tax is a penalty. Inflation is a penalty. Okay? So this is where we come in. So, okay, so let's understand we're in a commercial law system now. And again, if you wish to look this up, you can see Erie Railroad Company versus Tompkins, 304 U.S. Okay, and the date is April 25th, 1938. All right, this is basically 5 years after the insolvency of the corporation that you know as the United States government. So let us continue here. Okay, in 1945, the United States gave up any remaining national sovereignty when it signed on to the United Nations Treaty, making all citizens subject to United Nations jurisdiction. Folks, they sell all these organizations as, you know, benevolent organizations. Oh, we can't have the great world wars anymore, and obviously we don't want to. But we're going to have a meeting place so, you know, nations can send representatives and they're going to work out their differences. And no, folks, there's been more wars, more rebellions and uprisings financed by international financiers since the United Nations was formed. All right? When you look at the last century, the 1900s, according to numerous documents, well over 200 million people were killed by the actions of government. The number one killer of people around the world in the last century was not cancer, or it was not some medical disease, it was not a catastrophic event, it was the actions of government and the results thereof. And I think at some point we're going to do an in-depth study on that. But, excuse me, the problem with this becomes just like, remember the quote, the famous quote of from Lenin, that, you know, one murder becomes a tragedy, a million murders is merely a number. It's just like, you know, the bank has got $28 trillion now. You know, when we started this show and we started bringing this up, it was 14.3. Then it went to 23.7. Now it's over $28 trillion and not a mortgage paid. So, okay, so now we're at a commercial law system. I am very sorry, folks. My apologies. Okay? And so there's a conclusion here. And it says the Constitution for the United States, and this is, I wish I could read this, but it's the small u, so it's the original organic Constitution, and the Bill of Rights are no longer in effect in their original form or where they conflict with the United Nations Treaty or any other international agreements. Citizens of the several states of the Union who were formerly sovereigns, protected by common law, are now United States, uppercase, ink, black ink, citizens, and thus are subjects to international admiralty jurisdiction. Wow, look at this, admiralty jurisdiction. Folks, if you look behind me, you will see two flags. And you'll see the stars and stripes that we all know, okay, on my left. And the other flag you'll see on my right is called our civil flag of peace. So it's very important why we have these flags up, because every nation has a flag of wartime and peacetime, okay? So with the battle flag, if you would, the flag to my left, which we all know is the United States flag, you're going to see that a lot of times that flag will have a gold fringe around it, okay? Now, if you go to Title 4 of Flags and Standards, you will see that when you go into a courtroom and they have that gold fringe around it. Now, some people, some veterans and some military people know this as the parade flag. Excuse me. It's important that you understand when you go to Title 4 and you look at that gold fringe, you will understand that they are telling you, one, that flag is our battle flag, our flag of war, okay? And two, you, from the gold fringe, you are under admiralty law. Very simple. So when you walk into a courtroom and you see the battle flag, okay, so you're not under common law jurisdiction, because if you were, you'd be flying the flag to my right. And when you see the gold fringe, you're going to know you're under admiralty law. Go to Title 4 and look this up. Very easy. Okay? Or get on the internet and punch in gold fringe on American flag. And you will see this. All right? So when this conclusion, if you would, says that you're under admiralty jurisdiction, there are 6 forms of law under admiralty jurisdiction, and one of them is called law mercantile, commercial law. That is the law system that you are under, that the Supreme Court acknowledged on April 25th, 1938, through Erie Railroad Company versus Tompkins. And again, we ask you to look that up. So now we got to get to Steve's question is, how did we lose control of our property? And Don, I know I caught you by surprise here. I'm hoping you can hone in on that. But I wanted you to see, folks, this is the document that I've been reading to you verbatim. And my apologies, Don, but I just want everybody to see this. Senate document 93-549, and I ask a report of the Special Committee on the Termination of the National Emergency, United States Senate, November 19th, 1973, U.S. Government Printing Office, Washington, D.C., 24-509-0. So I want you to understand that we are reading this verbatim. Now, when you go through this, they mention what national, this is in 1973, folks. There's been more since then, including Bill Clinton, including George Bush, and including President Obama, have all declared their own states of declared national emergency, because why they're doing that is because what Lincoln did in the very beginning that we went over is that during times of declared national emergency, the president is acting upon its own executive privilege. And this is why we have this continuous national declaration, declaration of national emergency. So the president doesn't have to go to the Congress. Congress is a dog and pony show, folks. You ever watch C-SPAN and you got congressmen speaking to the Speaker of the House and for the Congress and for the record, and he or she the only people in there? The rest of the place is vacant behind them? You want to know why? Because it doesn't matter. They all know it doesn't matter. All right? The language in these bills, this is all done in back rooms. All right? The Congress of the United States it's a non-factor. They may give you the, oh, by the way, folks, if you want to go even deeper, while you're watching this one person speak to the Speaker of the House, look behind the Speaker of the House and you'll see these 2 big symbols there. They're called fasci. You know what they represent? Fascism. Right there. As a matter of fact, on one of the following future shows, we're going to get that out and we're going to show it to you from C-SPAN itself. I see it all the time. Look on the back of a dime. You know, the 10-cent piece? You'll see the same thing. Fascism. It's been there since 1933. What's the definition of fascism? Mussolini, I think, gave it the Italian dictator Mussolini gave it the best definition that I've ever heard. It's basically corporatism. It's when corporations are controlling the mechanisms of government. Okay? And this is where we are today. So when you look behind the Speaker of the House and you see these 2 big fasci, there's one to the left, one to the right, they're brown. Okay? Understand these symbols and this deception is right in your face. They're telling you what their goal is. Fascism. Fascism, corporatism. Are we not in a state of corporatism right now? Bankers getting $28 trillion, not a mortgage paid? Absolutely we are. So anyway, I digress a little bit, but let's get back into this Senate document 93-549. And I'm going to read this real quick. Since March 9th, 1933, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. In fact, there are now in effect 4 presidential proclaimed states of national emergency. Folks, this is 1973. There's actually, I think, 8 right now. Okay? But let's go on. President Truman, on December 16, 1950, during the Korean conflict, declared a state of national emergency. Okay? Folks, when you study this document and you keep going on, you're going to be shocked to find out that even though the Korean truce was signed in 1952, they never did away with the declared national state of emergency. Okay? So it was carrying over from 33, then 1950, and then up to August 15, 1971. They just kept adding to it. Why? Again, because as Lincoln did in times of declared national emergency, he had executive privilege. All right? So this is how the president is getting away with this. Now, I know we read this in the last show, but let's just do this again. What are the powers delegated by these statutes to the president during times of national emergency? He may seize any and all property, organize and control the means of any and all production, seize commodities. Can you say gold and silver? Assign military forces abroad and domestically, institute martial law, seize control of any and all transportation and communication, regulate the operation of private enterprise, restrict travel, and in a plethora of particular ways, control the lives of all American citizens. Who is superior and who is inferior here? Okay? Now, the Special Committee on the Termination of National Emergency was created to examine the consequences of terminating the declared states of national emergency that now prevail. Okay? And when you continue reading this, you will see, like I said, the one of 1950 through the Korean War was never, it's still in power. It's still in effect. All right? Right? Problem, reaction, solution. Okay? Hegelian dialectic. This is what they do so very well. So I have to skip this because of the sake of time, but I want to get to Steve's question about property. All right? And here we are. So we understand where we are, and most importantly, we understand where we are not with regards to sovereignty and inferior and superior position. Okay? Every corporation, as you know, has a structure. Well, the United States government corporation is no different. Every corporation has possessions. Well, the insolvent corporation, United States government, is no different. And we have demonstrated to you time and time again that you are a possession of that insolvent corporation. We get into the birth certificates, how the birth certificates with the Brown's Index, we've done all that. And I'm sorry for the sake of time, we don't have time to do all that right now, but we ask you to go to previous shows and at www.katv.org and follow our last previous shows, folks, and it'll catch you up to date as to where we are. But it's for you to understand how we lost possession of what we perceive to be ours, we have to understand the position of power that we are in, and obviously it is an inferior one. Okay. So the insolvent corporation goes bankrupt, the gold and silver is taken, the public trust, is liened, and we become commercial entities insolvent through the insolvent corporation in a commercial law system. Hence, we become debtors in a commercial law system. You can only be a debtor or a creditor in a commercial law system. You are bonded through the birth certificate through the Midwest Bank Note Company or the North American Bank Note Company. Hey, think of them words, bank note. Company. What's a bank? What's a note? And what's a company? Right? The bank is where everything it's kept, whatever value it may have, fiat or intrinsic. What's a note? An acknowledgement of debt. And what's the company? Corporation. You'll be very interested to find that these two corporations are behind all the birth certificates in the United States. And when you do research on these companies, you'll find they go back to the 1800s, and they really were very enforced during the bankruptcy of the corporation that you know is the United States government. So we understand what we are, we understand what we're not, okay? We understand where we were previously, where we were sovereigns, begotten to none, as the King of England said at the end of the Revolution during the Treaty of Paris, okay? But that changed with the 14th Amendment, with the Lieber Codes, with the Reconstructionist Acts, and now we are mere chattel. And if you look up the word chattel, you will see that chattel is movable property which has been liened. That's what you are. That's what I am. We are chattel. They have the people at the top have a better word for us that they use for ourselves, and they call us goyams, which is an old Hebrew word for chattel. So, from one goyim to another, let's continue and see how, in fact, we lost control of our property, or what we perceive to be our property. Okay, Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917. Now, we went through this on other shows and very briefly on this show, but in there's a thing mentioned, the Alien Property Custodian Acts. And when you get into this, I think the best way to sum this up for sake of time, because we're running out of time, is go to the Supreme Court, Central Union Trust Company versus Garvin. Now, this is 1921, so the insolvency has not taken place yet. Again, this is 1921 U.S. 554, 41, subchapter 214, in which the Supreme Court states, in a broad sense, the United States is a trustee to hold enemy property taken under this act. Now, you remember we talked about Senate Document 93-549 and the Lincoln having the ability to let the enemy reside where he's through his benevolence, to use their own language. Okay? Now, they're just, this is the Supreme Court, Central Union Trust Company versus Garvin, 1921, in law implementing this. Okay? So let's do it again. In a broad sense, the United States is a trustee to hold enemy property taken under the act until such time as the United States, uppercase, talking of the corporation, in orderly course shall determine the disposition thereof. Now, I want you to break this language down. Uppercase, the United States, okay, which is a trustee to hold enemy property taken under the act. The act they're speaking of, folks, again, is the Trading with the Enemies Act of 1917, which was amended through the 1933 Trading with the Enemies Act, where the definition of enemy was changed to the citizens of the United States. And we're going to read that to you verbatim, okay? So, how do we get to the point? Now, if you're looking for I don't have the time to go through all this, and I'm sorry. The redefinition of private property rights is found in Senate Document 43, better known as Contracts Payable in Gold. It was authored by a gentleman by the name of George Thorpe, Thorpe. It's quite lengthy. I ask you to look at that, and I'll mention it one more time. Senate Document 43, better known as Contracts Payable in Gold by George Thorpe. Now, I need you to examine that and go over that, because it gets into the legalese, particularly about what took place with regards to the War Powers Act through these continuous declarations of national emergency. Okay. I know this gets confusing, folks, and so stay with me. Now, let's answer Steve's question verbatim. On page 9 of the War Powers Act of Senate Document 93-549, okay? And now, look this up. Senate Document 93-549, the President, a War Powers Act, the President, in the fact, on page 9, states, are we ready for this? The ultimate ownership of all property is in the state. Individuals' so-called ownership is only by virtue of the government, i.e., law amounting to mere user, and use must be in accordance with the law and subordinate to the necessities of the state. Steve, there is your answer, my friend. The ultimate ownership of all property is in the state. Individuals' so-called ownership is only by virtue of the government, i.e., law amounting to mere user, and use must be in accordance with the law and subordinate to the necessities of the state. Senate document 93-549, page 9. Now, do you remember when we broke down the language of the word certificate? Remember? What was it? One, it held intrinsic value, and two, it meant mere bearer use of. Someone is allowing you to use that entity, whatever it may be, your car, your automobile, the nom de guerre, whatever it may be, but some controlling entity is allowing you to use this, whether it be, like I said, your land, your car, whatever, all right? So when we break down the language of this, okay, the ultimate ownership, in other words, who really controls it and owns it, all property is in the state. What is the state? The state, folks, as we've demonstrated so plainly through the Supreme Court law today, is a franchisee of the federal corporation. Remember that language we read earlier? So who owns your land? Excuse me. Who owns the land you're residing on? Oh, and by the way, when you want to go even farther, a person who resides enjoys privileges, not rights. A right is unalienable. Privileges are granted and can be altered by the person delegating. So very important you understand that. But what is this telling us? The ultimate ownership of the property is in the state. Individual so-called ownership is by virtue of the government, the corporation, the insolvent corporation, and this is, okay, let me just continue, and i.e. law amounting to mere user, bearer use of, certificate, and use must be in accordance with the law and subordinate, not superior, subordinate, inferior in position, to the necessities of the state. So Steve, when you're trying to figure this out, there's your answer. And that is on Senate Document 93-549. And when you go back to the Kelo case that happened in Connecticut, when the Supreme Court said that the city could take, the corporation could take that land without any kind of monies due to the so-called owners. Well, why? Who actually owned that property? Was it the people who were residing in that house? Negative. It was the state. And this is how the Supreme Court came to that decision. And this is why then houses were torn down. And by the way, I know somebody who lives down there, and as of this past fall, the houses were torn down, but there was no building being done. So, Steve, I thank you for your question. It took us 2 shows to get to there, but we had to lay a foundation as to the whens, the wheres, the hows, and the whys, that we've come to this point that we are in an inferior position, a subordinate position, when at one time we were the sovereign unto ourselves. So, folks, when you say that the bankruptcy didn't mean anything to us, to me, it doesn't affect my lives. When you say that the money system doesn't affect my life, I think we have proven through their own writings and documentations and through case history, excuse me, that it very much does affect your life. And affects the lives of future generations. This $28 trillion that the Federal Reserve made a ledger, and think of this, folks, $28 trillion is a number I can't even conceive. But what it is this. We not only have to pay the money back, the $28 trillion that to this entity that gave us permission to print our own money, or our own legal tender, because as we know, we don't have money. But these are the people, them very same people who got the $28 trillion too, with no accountability. We have to pay them very same people the interest on that loan. I want you to put that together. You know, connect the dots, as they say. They get the $28 trillion by creating a ledger through the duress of threat and fear. Okay, what was it? Congressman Sherman came right out on the congressional floor and said, we were told that if we didn't pass this banking act, there would be martial law in the United States. Google that. Congressman Sherman speaks of martial law in the United States. It comes right up. This is a congressman. Now, who are they? They are the bankers. Who's in control here, folks? All right, are our elected representatives in control here? No, obviously not. They're curtailing to the bankers. Just like Lincoln's famous quote, I have the Confederate Army to my front door, and I have the international banksters to my rear door. For the future of my country, it is the banksters I fear the most. That's why he issued greenbacks. We've gone over that in this program. So this does affect your daily lives. It affects the future of our nation and of your children. And when you study history and you understand what a fiat currency is, which we have gone over on numerous times on this show, there is not one fiat currency that has ever survived the test of time. Not one. It's taken down many an empire. It's taken down many a republic. Of course, we are no longer a republic. We are a statutory democracy practicing imperialism throughout the world in a form of corporatism that we all know as fascism. With this being said, folks, I know some of this legalese can be confusing, and it's meant to be confusing. Remember the word code, taken from the Latin word coda, to be secretly altered. So we ask you to research all this stuff. I know there's a lot to this. These last two programs, we've gotten into some pretty heavy documentation, but we had to go down that avenue to answer Steve's question sufficiently. How did we lose control of the property that we perceive that we own? So folks, with that being said, as always, we are very thankful that you take the time from your busy day to watch this program. And as always, we remind you that your government is your responsibility, and we thank you for watching.